This video is brought to you by Midway USA. Support the channel by choosing Midway for your shooting and outdoor supplies.
So a very windy day. We have honestly mid-tier, decent mid-tier, good quality build all around.
Yep.
Just something that you would find in middle America. Let's see how it does.
Yep, let's do it. All right, we're on at 150 to start. Oh, the wind already. Woo.
Yep.
Dead center. Nice. All right, on at 2.
You know where those were?
I do, they were in the upper left chest.
Okay.
Okay, I'm on at 250. Off the left. Dead center. Nice.
That's a 1 mil right compensation for the wind.
That's insane. All right, 300. Impact. Impact. I am on at 350. Okay, hold. That was on the left edge, good elevation. Nice, centered that up.
Okay.
Right in the upper chest, nice shot.
So I'd venture to say, like, we shoot a lot of, let's say, like, military standardized rifles out here, but looking at this, like a full BCM upper build, Gen 2 Vortex Razor LPVO. I mean, this is a 2-stage trigger that's in here.
It's a LaRue 2-stage, yeah.
I mean, running 77s. This is essentially what you would see like a police officer using as a patrol rifle.
Yeah, I think so. Yep. All right, I'm on at 4. What's that?
We'll push the LPVO, right?
Yeah. Yes. Dead center. Dude, plate's not even moving because it's so perfectly in line on
nice.
Center. Nice. 450, I'm on. Impact, lower left quadrant. Center chest, nice shot. I'm on at 5. Impact. Just off the right edge. Same exact spot, just right.
Okay.
Nice.
Okay.
Dude, save those last 2 windage calls, right? Up till there, you were clean except the one miss at 250, which is kind of,
yeah.
Look, that's a throwaway.
I actually had been pushing more and more wind out, and now I'm noticing that the wind actually kind of
just dipped for a second on those last few shots.
They've eased off on, which is why you see it dropping to the right.
Right, because we have a right to left wind here, right? And you're on the right edge.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there's a lot to talk about. I mean, we shoot a lot of very military standard loadouts here. especially with the CNR rifles, especially with iron sight rifles. And a lot of times I think, as we come back to the conversation, we're looking at, what do we see in the US, like in the hands of law enforcement or just a citizen trying to, protect themselves with something like this. This is something that you would see in the hands of a lot of, people who would be just a little bit more serious, wanting to buy into something that is factory built with some type of quality assurance in any of these components, and put a hodgepodge of quality components, what it could generate. This is something that you would see.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times we shoot a lot of exotics and stuff, and we forget that these things, for a fraction of the price of some of the exotics that we see out there, actually keeps up extremely well, especially when you pair it with good ammunition, 77 grains stuff.
Absolutely.
I mean, I've got absolutely nothing bad to say about this. This is a very standard loadout. If I were to put something together, I realize why you use this as your like mid-range setup, because that's a very respectable performance.
And I want to talk a little bit more about sort of what you've touched on and alluded to here, which is just basically, this is just like a sort of the lowest tier rifle, quote unquote, that most quote unquote serious people who are trying to like actually train and use like a real, sort of build, what they're going to go for. It has a white light and an LPVO, and that's the crux of the setup. But before we get there, slap a new mag in.
I mean, you say that this is sort of the base rifle, but where's your sling, Josh?
So the sling is right over here next to me. I thought he got me.
What do you want to shoot at?
Let's try 650. I'm on there. I know that this is going to be a bit tough with the wind, but obviously the rifle is going to be capable. We'll see if I can spot you in and get you on out there. Impact!
I heard the beep. Someone had a beeper.
Was that your cue to shoot?
I heard the beep when I dropped the shot.
Bang! Nice. Dude, that was sick. Nice shot.
I think sometimes when something is voluminous, like when there's a lot of something, when it ceases to be a rarity, even though it performs extremely well, it does not have the same desire just based off of emotional reasons. Let's say like a Toyota Camry drives extremely well. One may say, vehicle for vehicle, if you could only have one vehicle, it would probably behoove you to drive something like a Toyota Camry instead of a 1960s Corvette.
Yeah.
Because the Camry is going to get you to places in a very practical sense. Same thing like this, it doesn't have, for us in America, it doesn't have the exotic factor to it, but a lot of times because of how...
You might want to put your ears on.
Because of how frequent these things are encountered...
You might want to put your ears on.
Okay.
Something's about to happen.
Purpose code. And why we see people put setups like this together to answer, as a
Hey, let's just go ahead and take this to the debrief.
Okay, yeah, okay.
And I want the audience to remember that I saved your ears.
Okay, so we've got shooting going on over there. Let's just take this to the debrief, because I think we've got a lot more to talk about.
Now, before we go any further, a quick word from this video sponsor and title sponsor of the show, Midway USA. Here at 9-Hole, you see us shoot a variety of firearms. We use various optics, from red dots to 25 power precision scopes. We shoot various ammunition, from ball to match to hand loads. We shoot off of various mats and rests, we transport our firearms in a whole bunch of different cases, and we maintain our firearms with a variety of cleaning supplies. But we can find all of this at Midway USA. Midway carries just about everything for serious shooters. But the product offering isn't the only reason we choose Midway. If you need an order shipped quick, Midway's shipping department is probably one of the best in the business. Almost all the orders we place there ship the same or the next business day. And lastly, something I personally love, the stock availability feature. Not only can you see if a product is in stock and available to ship, but you can also see when back-ordered or out-of-stock items are expected to be available again. This lets us know it's safe to order a back-ordered product and that we won't get stuck waiting for months for it to come back into stock. So, if you're looking to pick up some new gear, be sure to check out Midway USA. Now, let's get back to the show.
Youngsters and kids. Once upon a time, when Josh and I first got into shooting, we sort of knew the market as the A, B, and C's of AR-15s. That would be the Armalites, Bushmasters, and Colts. These would be the duty-grade AR-15s that you could not go wrong with. And back in the day, the standard back then was 16-inch barrel, carbine-length gas, pinned front sight block with a standard weight or H2 weight buffer and standard spring. And that right there was the standard for a duty-grade rifle. Could be a red dot, could be iron sights. But Josh, those days have been usurped. And the B there has been usurped by a different company, evident.
Yeah, I'd say that when we think about how things have progressed in the last 15 or so years in this space, in the AR space, you've a couple primary things which took place. One is the development of this whole option of this budget brand or budget-centric series of brands, whether it's PSA or Arrow or I guess maybe you could throw Anderson or Radical into there in some capacity, right? So this creation of the budget end of the spectrum, which totally blew up the market value and what money could get you in the AR space and made ARs way more accessible. That was one piece. And the second piece was the sort of proliferation of BCM. Is BCM, when I and you got into things, was like this new brand that was sort of coming on the scenes, and they were pioneering some what might today seem like standards, but they were sort of pioneering, or so it felt to us, pioneering some adjustments to things like going to a mid-length gas system, going to rail systems that weren't quad rails. In fact, we'll get to this in a minute, but this rifle was actually quite an old rifle, and it was originally sold before Keymod and M-Lock were even a thing. And so these guys were, I think it's safe to say, like sort of on the front half of pushing some of those trends and creating what is widely considered today sort of like the professional grade, like standard rifle. It's not something crazy and Gucci. It's not running like billet sets or specialty barrel receiver extension handguard combos. It's just the really well put together, good parts, gonna work and be sort of a workhorse style gun. Also shoot pretty nice style AR. And I think BCM in many cases has sort of become the standard for that, especially when you look at it compared to some of the other just brands that are out there now that you can buy ARs from.
Yeah, that's kind of been one thing that has been the most standout thing about BCM, I think, has been the standard, basically holding the standards for material and components. In fact, I would say, I think BCM was one of those brands that when we were first starting the project, I mean, I was already looking at BCM as like what I would want to use as a bedside rifle. If I were a patrol officer, like a law enforcement officer, that's kind of usually one of those that gets thrown out there as a standard for these guys to look at. And I think the big thing is, so law enforcement agencies are really touchy on whether things work or not in the field because they are legally liable for a lot of things when a rifle touches off. And so for a lot of these officers to consider a rifle, that level of reliability has to be there, right? So, but the whole 16-inch rifle, 16-inch AR-15 with a interface rail of some sorts in the front that's free-floated, that's kind of turned into the That's a do-all rifle in America. That is, Russia has its Kalashnikov. We have our 16-inch carbine, AR15. You have the Glock as the standard universal pistol, and this, to us, is the universal rifle in America.
Yeah, and I don't want to misrepresent that there are other brands out there who are in this space, but I think a lot of us, especially those of us who are in the gun space, tend to think about BCM as sort of filling that role. I know that when I have people come to me and ask me, like friends, family, whatever, hey, I'm looking at getting an AR. I won't get a lot of them. I won't get, like, this will be the one that I get. And I want it to sort of last forever, and sort of, I don't need anything super fancy, but I also don't want like just something that I'm going to want to replace parts on in the next year or two. It's like, oh, well, I just end up pointing towards BCM, and I'm sort of like, that's the one I would go to at this point. I think from the price point to what you get for the longevity, these guns are really, really solid options. In fact, this gun I originally got in 2012. So this gun's actually 12 years old.
I was still in the Army in 2012. I was sending you... That's when there was the great ammunition famine in America.
Uh-huh.
And I was sending you pictures.
You were sending ammunition to me, Henry?
No, I was sending you pictures of oodles of ammunition that I had behind me as an ordnance guy. I still remember, yeah, because you were... This was one of your big boy, like, stepping away from the budget rifles into something that was duty grade, right?
Yeah, this was my second AR.
Yeah.
My first one being something that I like pieced together with you over time, and sort of like, it was wild to think about it now in hindsight. But this was like the first one that I went out that was like a full on, like maybe my third one, but it was like it's number 2 or 3, and it was sort of my first one to really go out and get something that was like, this is the rifle.
But look at the performance though. Like looking at what we saw today, that didn't look like some guy's second rifle that they put together for serious use.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
High winds.
Yeah.
I mean, we were shooting 77s, okay, but high winds, like those winds were no joke.
And gusting too, which makes it exceptionally challenging. In fact, I know somebody will ask like why there was multiple misses at the 500 in a row or whatever, and it's like we did the math quickly in the ballistic calculator, just looking at the difference between like a 10 and a 17 mile an hour wind in terms of trying to judge hold off, and it would be, for those of you who are watching, something like the sustained wind was about a 2.5 target hold off, and the gusting wind, and the wind was just changing on a dime from like sort of sustained to gust, the gust would push it to about 4.5 target lengths of hold off in terms of being at 500. So it's a pretty radical change in terms of what the winds we're dealing with. And to your point, Henry, like we're shooting this thing, and frankly, it's performing. It's right alongside any of these other high tier, very nice rifles that we've brought on the show, with something like, two-ish misses. Yes, you did flub one at 250.
That was operator error. I'm very honest. I mean, I'm not perfect. I'm just far from perfect. People a lot of times when they look at wind, they're thinking, oh, it's the higher the wind speed, the scarier, right? Yes, but the more difficult thing is the variation. If you're looking at the baseline of the 10 mile an hour sustained, pushing up 20 plus, I mean, that is like factors of the 10 mile an hour pushing up there. And that's just not easy. But by the time we got to 500, I still remember my mentality. Fired, the plates were so shot up, I had no idea where the hits were at that point. I just knew it was a hit. Under that kind of wind, I was taking the most conservative option.
Impact.
Put it on the same hold, and then I missed one, right? And I was thinking maybe that's just outside of the cone of fire, or there was a wind gust that pushed it off. Pushed another one, same spot. That's the information I needed to make adjustment, and then the next shot was a hit. And so, when you explain stuff, I felt that we needed to kind of explain some of that stuff, and it wasn't just pulling the trigger until we got a hit. There was an actual process that was going through our minds.
A conscious decision to maintain your hold. And I know somebody's looking back in the footage that's stabilized, you'll see that you can see that the first round at 500 impacted on the right quadrant of the plate. But in the moment, we couldn't see it because there was so much wind in the binos and in the camera. All we could know was that it did touch the plate.
Going back to the actual rifle, so looking at it, we actually pressed farther than that. We got 650, and then we attempted
First
7.
shot.
Yeah, we had
650 first shot.
We attempted 7, but that was a little too iffy under those wind conditions, I think.
It was just too hard to spot. Too.
Yeah.
And there was fresh green grass, so there was zero splash.
Yeah.
Couldn't make out ultimately where it was coming in at with the amount of shake in the binos.
But let's look at this objectively. Like, compare this to some of the other rifles that we've seen, right? Some of the newer rifles and some of the older advanced rifles, like the Scar, seem to be very similar in performance.
Yeah, I mean, this is on par with the Scar, the SIG LT, the MR556 that we shot way back in the day. It's on par with all of these that have like 1 or 2 misses on course.
Right. And I would venture to say, having seen you shoot this thing up close and having shot a few rounds out of it up close, it does gas nicer than the M4. Like a bone stock, like military M4. But the big thing, I think, why it drives it to become America's rifle is having all of this stuff, but then having a price point that really sells it.
It's the perfect sort of like, if you think about it from budget to high-end tier, this is the perfect sort of like mid-tier or slightly above mid-tier where you're getting all of the stuff you kind of want, where the value and the performance are best maximized, in my opinion. When you start going further and further towards the end, you start spending more and more money, but the amount that you get for that additional money becomes less and less visible, right? You pay way more for the last 20% than you're paying for the 80%, that's much further down on the scale. So again, this is a rifle, just for perspective. Again, I don't even remember the model number of this one exactly, and I looked back for an old receipt. I couldn't find it, but this was a rifle that I got in 2012, and it was shipped with this handguard, which is one of the OG white labeled BCM Midwest handguards before Keymod, before M-Lock, where you could literally just screw panels into like threaded holes and head venting on it. It was, again, this is where I'm sort of saying these are some of the things that I noticed about the brand in general. Is they're sort of pushing forward some of these things which later became standardized, right? So these were the early days of seeing some of the competition stuff, like the tube handguards, for example, be translated over into more like user grade firearms or professional grade firearms that you then see ultimately being adopted on things like the URGI in the most current forms, or like the most extended forms in full M-Lock and everything else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, there's such a huge debate on what's acceptable, like duty grade stuff. I mean, I don't think this is gospel on what you have to, like, this isn't what you have to have if you're a patrol officer, right? It's just a really good option is more so what I'm grasping at.
And again, what I would say from a volume perspective on this is, granted, we've shot a bunch, and we do continually trade out which guns we're shooting, which guns we're putting rounds on as part of the show, and that's become really evident the last 5 to 7 years. But this rifle has 5 figures, low 5 figures, but 5 figures rounds on it. And so I don't know that it's more than 15 or 20, but it's more than like 8 or 9 in terms of thousands of rounds, right? So I think it's probably between like 10 and 15,000 rounds on the gun in total.
Original barrel?
And a good amount of that is like shot aggressively. It's not like precision oriented shooting, and it still shoots very, very well.
This is the original barrel?
Yeah, original barrel.
Is this like a button cut or cold hammer forge?
Cold hammer forge barrel.
Chrome line, probably?
I believe so. Again, I was way back in the Wayback Machine on it, but I believe so.
Okay.
And again, it's not like it's like I've replaced some of like the internal stuff like gas rings and things like that on it, but nothing crazy. It's still the original bolt carrier and bolt.
See, this stuff is news to me. Like when I go over to Josh's collection, all like half of this stuff looks the same. So I don't know the difference between this and that. I certainly didn't know that this was your second rifle that you shot.
I think second or third. I think it might have been third. Now that I'm thinking back on it, because I had the first one I built for competition, and then I had like an assembled gun that I had put together that was more like quote unquote duty oriented. And then I think this was the one that I got after that. So third rifle.
But again, this is the first like factory built, not garage, not Josh's garage built. With the cost put aside, I wanted to draw attention before we maybe like for just a couple more minutes. If someone were to be putting a duty rifle together, the optics, that money saved in not buying the SR15, not buying the LMT, spending that money on the optics instead. I think we saw a good use case out here, even though this was this is an older Gen 2 Razor, right? So the reticle didn't have the ballistic dots, but still, I mean, it held its own.
I think it goes to show that depending upon the type of shooting that you're doing, you don't actually need certain types of reticles. We're shooting on a relatively known distance range. It's technically not a known distance. It's technically UKD, but we have done it enough that we know approximately the ranges of each of these targets. And they're large enough and silhouetted enough against like an obviously contrasted background where you can shoot something like this and be really effective. This would be like the 3-gun type engagement, which is where the Razor 1-6, sort of more basic crosshair with a couple of mil hashes or a few BDC points, depending upon which variant you had, shines. But when you start pushing beyond, I was tickled that you got first round hits at 650 with it. I thought that was that was good. Like that's pushing that optic. Not that you can't do it. Obviously you did it, but it's that's starting to push the limits of what that optic is going to be optimally used for.
Yeah, but my point on this is the optic, like the money saved from getting a BCM instead of one of the more expensive systems could be translated towards optics and ammunition for shooting.
So then, Henry, let's talk purely practically about like budget. It's not something we normally do. We're not generally giving a ton of like purchasing advice here. We usually are just sort of demonstrating stuff and allowing people to extrapolate value. But if we look at again the value conversation here, you can get a rifle, an optic, whether it's a really nice high grade dot or a nice LPVO with a standard, let's call it above standard weapon light, but like a nice functional duty grade weapon light, and you're all in on that might be somewhere sub 2,500, right, for using a BCM as a base and using like today pricing. If you go minus a few years, the pricing would have been way better. Is that to say that like you have to spend that amount of money on stuff? No, it doesn't. But we're talking about like professional user grade stuff. That's sort of where I think that's like a not crazy amount for an all-in package with optics, base rifle, lights, and maybe a bit of ammunition to train with, depending upon a variety of different factors.
Now, I will say, and I have a tendency of looking at things that go significantly cheaper than Josh. There are other ways that you could also look at that. Again, once you start dipping underneath the BCM, you start really sacrificing certain things. Like the BCM gases very well. When you shoot it on up close, like that sensation, you're gonna get faster follow-up shots. But the big thing is if you want something that works and can do the thing to drop the projectile out, you could also look at some trade-in rifles. But then you really risk yourself on how much was the rifle shot by the person previously owning it, or the used market, right? So you get a lot of value out of the used market, kind of like used cars, but you don't know who ran it before. For people like me who like to use these like old school systems that are traded in by law enforcement, a lot of times they work just fine. Sometimes, though, Josh has seen me frustrated with some of the gassing on these things because turns out the gas port is toast because said officer was friends with a SWAT unit and clipped it on his third position lower all the time. So, yeah, it's a...
Just bore out that gas port.
Yeah, so, I mean, yeah, it's a Colt. Great. It does have a Colt Hammer forged chrome line barrel trade-in. It looks great from the outside, but turns out she was a rental, all right. But when you're looking at the value, there are ways to like further defeating it is what I'm trying to get in this conversation. But unlike cars, having a fresh item with 0 on the odometer for your rifle, if you're really thinking about using like Josh did, putting 5-digit figures on the round count into these things and building that skill, I would just go with something like this if that's your goal.
So, gang, those of you who stuck around to the end, we certainly appreciate you. Do all the great YouTube stuff, like, comment, subscribe, if you're feeling up to it. Praise the algorithm gods. And also, hop over and join us in Patreon. Hop into the private Discord. Get some interactions with Henry and myself directly. But also, there's a great group of people in there at this point that are sharing great information. And so, if you're so inclined, hop over there. And as always, we appreciate it. Until next time, we'll see you guys on the range.
Cyber 16, this is Geo 96, 4 Vic, 8 packs, Redcon 1, green to green. How copy, over?
Geo 96, this is Cyber 16, roger, over. 16, Geo 91, 1 pack, green, green, over. This is Cyber 16, roger, over.
16, 2, 1 Victor, 2 packs, Redcon 1, over.